inscription in the early 18th century, but most inscriptions run out 15th century, where you don't have inscriptions on stones and copper after that. So the 14th century texts that we have them only because they're in 19th century copies. We don't actually have any texts, any actual original manuscripts, the original version from before the 18th century, except for those two Sufi texts that I referred to. And recently there have been a couple of manuscripts discovered in Sumatra, which have nothing to do with Islam, unfortunately, but are older. So, I mean, really, there are probably not more than, well, there's the Kunjura Karna, which is 14th century. There are probably not more than 6 or 8 manuscripts in the whole of Indonesia, older than the 18th century, and only these 2 relate to Islam. The third manuscript that Dreves edited is the one I mentioned, which is from a transition somewhere. They distinguish between Gomu Salam and Gomu Jowo. The problem with that is it's not dated. We don't know where it's from, we don't know when it's from. All we know is that from some area in Java, in transition from Hinduism to Islam, and that could have been Belambangan in 1780. It could be that late. We just don't know. So there's a remarkable absence of written material. And the Dutch, of course, understood very little of this. Tommy Pelesh's account is the most helpful. He's a very interesting man. He was interested in all these things. Other Portuguese sources are useless, almost useless. They have almost no interest in these things. But Pelesh was interested. And we're lucky to have him.
So, Professor, how do you know the Sabto Palon?
About the
Sabto Palon.
Sabto Palon. Sabto Palon appears in manuscripts from the 18th century onwards. It's probably much older, but Sabto Palon is described as the name of one of the advisors of the last king of Majapahit, Bravijoyo, but it's in 19th century books. So it's really just legends about the past. And the story is, those are those anti-Islamic books. The story is that Sabto Palon and Noyo Genggong. Sabto Palon, Noyo Genggong are the advisors to Bravijoyo. In some texts, Sabto Palon, Noyo Genggong appears to be one person with a long name. In some texts, and they say to the king, well, do not convert to Islam. Your ancestors have all been, Agapahuto, stay with that. And then when he converts anyway, they get very angry with him. But Sabto Palon is then revealed as Samar. So he's really Samar.
I think it's in Surat Dharma.
In General Dharma, yeah.
I'm not mistaken.
I haven't actually. Oh, sorry.
Do you have the book from Jacob Sumarjo about the artifact? And then the interesting thing is that he said that the history of Islam in Indonesia needs to be revised, because most of the historians said that the Islam in Indonesia began in 13th century, but he said the Islam in Indonesia is beginning when the Prophet Muhammad is still alive. It's he proved it by the Chinese report. He said that there is a Tasi kingdom in North Sumatra. So it's built around 7th century. So he said that actually Islam reached Indonesia when the Prophet is still alive. So
well, it's almost certain that Muslims were present in the country from the beginning, because there were traders going through. All we can say is that the evidence we have of local establishment of local Muslim communities comes from a later period. I don't actually know that Chinese reference. I'd be interested to see it, but there have always been attempts to prove Islam here was present from the beginning. As I said, I have no difficulty with that. Of course it was. The question is, when do you get local societies converted? And that seems, as far as we can tell, that seems to be later.
So it's dated in the 14th century because Sufism, because of mysticism, it was attractive to young people. What is the main explanation?
Yeah, that is only a hypothesis. We can't prove it. But and the main argument in favor of it is simply a question of timing. That is, we begin to see evidence of local conversions. At the same time, when we see Islam internationally being more dominated by Sufis. And that's usually associated with the spread of Sufi tarikats after the fall of Baghdad. So that's the hypothesis. There is a hypothesis for which there's no evidence, there's only logic, the logic of the timing. And at least it explains, as I say, the first material we have, which says what was the content of the teaching, that first evidence is Sufi. So, but there's early Quranic exegesis to the 16th century.
That and the whole Shafi.
Yeah.
We really don't know of anything other than Shafi, and Shafi legal texts ever.
That's right, unless, we'll probably talk about that more next time, but the possibility of some of the evidence of Chinese influence suggests you've got numbers.
What was Chen Ho's date?
Early 15th century. There were several voyages from first was 1403, I think, was it? Something like that, and the last voyage had been in the 1430s.
There was a